So my talk is why your IT project is doomed to fail. And interestingly enough, so I've kind of researched this topic independently, kind of for the talk, and just personally interesting to me and important to me. And interestingly enough, like one of the huge factors that always comes up everywhere you look is actionable customer feedback to meet user needs. It's like this huge bucket. So doing this talk at AlphaUX is a great venue to be at. So first, thanks all for coming and being able to talk about this subject, because it's like a really painful sort of subject, right? We're failing. It means we're making big bets and we're trying to predict what's going to happen, and then we're wrong. And to be able to reflect on that and learn from that requires a lot of maturity and introspection. So it's a mixed bag for a topic. And despite the fact that this talk is called Why Your Project is Doomed to Fail, and that we're going to look at a bunch of stuff that hopefully I will prove to you that it is going to fail, your project will fail, I feel like I'm actually very cautiously optimistic about software projects and that ours go fairly well. But this is just like the nature of the industry. So we'll get to talk about that. Oh my gosh, let me press this and that. Okay, cool. So nice to meet you guys. I'm David Coleman. Like Alex said, I work at CitrusByte. My title on the website is development manager, but I hire developers, designers, product managers. I do sales. I help oversee the delivery of software products. We work with tons of companies in the enterprise space, a few startups. Our big brands are Apple, Goldman Sachs, American Express. Startup brands, well, now they're big companies, but like Shutterstock. And we've done a ton of work with sort of smaller brand companies, helping them at the very early stage innovation phase, all the way from founders raising money to getting product market fit. So we've got a wide array of experience there. We do everything from initial product strategy, user research, design, all the way through to development and execution on a continuous basis for customers. So we've built lots of cool stuff. These are a couple samples of projects we've done for AT&T and Nielsen. I'm also a dad. I don't have any pictures of that, but I want one of those Nucleus devices now. Talk to my family. Cool, and like I said, we work with a ton of different brands, so really proud to be a part of the New York City product management community. Oh man. This is the hardest video game in the world, is to keep these things in sync. Jackie's super impressive. All right, so why does this subject matter? So just to give you an idea of kind of where we're at, about 20 years ago, software was a $250 billion industry in the US. So that's a lot of money. But in 1995, we spent $250 billion on software in the US alone. I tried to figure out what we did in 2015, but I could only find the statistic for the whole world. The worldwide spend in IT was $3.4 trillion. There's a famous quote from Mark Andreessen, which is software is eating the world. And I think this really illustrates that point. The whole industry is just growing. It's absolutely huge. We spend tons of money on it. And kind of despite decades of experience as a society in software, only 29% of projects succeed. So 52% of projects are challenged, and 19% are canceled altogether. So there's a group called the Standish Group. They run a report every single year where they survey thousands of IT companies, startups, and they take kind of a pulse of how projects progress, what the size is, what the failure rate is, what the reasons are. And what they've found is in 1995, the success rate was 19%, and now it's 29%. So for 20 years we've been working. This is like a core discipline of the entire human race, and we're only successful like less than a third of the time. And then you can kind of like multiply 71% by $3.4 trillion and figure out how much is just getting like wasted. It's quite a bit. It's a big deal. On average, projects are 222% late. They're 189% over budget. So an average budget overrun of 189% is very common. Has anyone here had does this resonate with anyone? Like, oh, I've experienced a software project being late. Shocker, right? Yeah. And on top of that, it's common that only 61% of the scope is completed, right? So you're working for twice as long, so kind of obviously you might be spending twice as much to get there, but then you're ending up with like half of what you wanted when you started. And these are the ones that are like getting through and kind of off the ground. And none of this even determines if you built what people actually care about. Like, did you build something that people want? Like, what's the adoption rate, right? Is the 61% of scope the right scope to have built? All right, here comes the test. Oh, there we go. Cool. And so what happens a lot of times, so as a consultant, we kind of come in from this outside perspective, and we get to talk to customers all the time about why are they looking for outside help. And a very, very common story is that in the initial phase of a project, there's a lot of excitement because previous project shortcomings seem distant, right? Like, oh yeah, we did this last year and it failed, but this year's going to be different. We have this new project. We just learned about user testing. We're going to do user testing now. It's going to be awesome. There might be it's kind of like a silver bullet that people are glomming onto in the interest of making a project successful and telling a story to sell it through to management. And every project starts as green, right? It's kind of like there's two things in the world where they always start out perfect. It's like a relationship. There's nothing wrong with a person. Like if you just haven't met them yet and you're about to meet them, they're perfect. And your software projects, there's nothing's late. Everything is open-ended, and you get to define everything in this kind of blue sky environment. But as time goes on, there start to maybe like crop up long-term concerns, maybe a couple months into the project. Hey, we're trying to integrate with this third party, and it's not ready yet, but don't worry, it'll be ready on time, so we're not really going to do anything about it now. A few months in, maybe some dates slip, like, yeah, we thought that would be done in 6 weeks, but it's really going to be 12. And eventually it becomes clear that the project is going to be late, maybe the quality's missing, like, we kept hearing that it was going to get better, the user experience was going to get better, this one feature was going to get added, it never got added. And kind of towards the late stages of a project, panic starts, because if you're working on something you thought it was going to be 6 months, you don't really freak out until like month 4 or 5, even if you're not 50% of the way through, 50% in month 3. So it's quite often that you start to panic when there's really not enough time left to actually to fix anything, or to get things back on track in the original time frame. So oftentimes, that's just what you're stuck with, and you've got kind of this hard choice of how to fix the problem, usually investing more money, more time, missing targets, answering to people who might be upset. And despite using the latest and greatest technology or glomming onto the silver bullet, which I just see all the time, maybe this project fails and you like repeat the cycle over again. There's also a very common pattern. Does anyone here know Brooks Law? This is something that comes up all the time in kind of like software project management. Like sometimes you get halfway through and you're like, geez, if we could get twice as many people, we'll get it done twice as fast. And you just add all this like communication overhead and complexity. Brooks Law is a law that adding people makes it actually even later. So this is exactly like where that type of phenomenon would show itself. Cool. So what's causing all this? What I always hear working with our customers, I always hear like, these IT people, they made these bad decisions, the estimates weren't right. There tends to be a lot of focus on technology problems and execution problems oriented around that. There's a study from IBM. They said 54% of their projects fail because of project management, not because of technical challenges. This is a super interesting sort of data point, because if you think about what that might mean in practice, project management is kind of how we work, how we communicate, the choices that we make, the compromises that we make, how we plan, how we prioritize. Whereas when you think about the type of technical challenges that we're encountering, it's quite often that, especially now in 2016, with so much open source software, so much knowledge on the internet, so many people coming to the software engineering community, that it's not uncommon to solve new business problems without solving new novel technology problems. Lots of technology around geolocation, IoT, web application frameworks, tons of stuff that you can build to help customers without having to create new novel technology solutions. So it makes sense that it's not necessarily likely to have a technological barrier to completing the problem. So most certainly, engineers are a big component of getting work done, but not necessarily the first place to go to look to figure out how to improve how we're working. Cool. So I mentioned the Standish Group Chaos Report earlier. So the report they put out on IT projects is called the Chaos Report. This is a breakdown of projects by size. So grand, you can think like healthcare.gov, right? Only like $500 million, not too big. Small, you can think startups. And if you look at just the successful column and just grand and small, Small is 62% of projects are successful. That's already double what we saw in the first slide, where only 29% on average were successful. And grand is only 2%, so that's 1/15 as many. And the disparity there is like 3,000. I'm bad at math. It's like 3,000%, right? It's 30 times larger, 30 times more likely to be successful if your project is a small project. And that makes a lot of sense. You hear often about startups moving fast. They're really focused on shipping things. They get easy access to users, easy access to making adjustments. There's fewer people that are involved in compromising decisions. So if you have to make a sacrifice, there's less barriers that you have to push through to get there. And you think about grand projects, you hear about healthcare.gov. You look at websites like the DMV. I hope no one here works at the DMV. If you do, call CitrusPy. But yeah, I mean, you work with some of these places where you understand them to be bureaucratic organizations and involve lots of people and bigger timescales, and all this complexity adds up exponentially to reduce the success of projects. And then everyone here is probably familiar with agile software development. So another way that the same report looks at projects is by the methodology that they use to manage projects, right? Were all the requirements coming in up front, or were they okay with having a less firm plan and being more responsive to change and the exact needs of the business and how those mapped to what the users were showing them they would respond to. And across all project sizes, you can look at small, medium, and large. There's a 10 to 20% increase in the chance of success if they used Agile instead of Waterfall, right? So that kind of makes sense. Agile is a methodology that's designed to help projects be successful, which is why it's become a best practice across the board. And this is just evidence to support that. I think it's if you ever have someone tell you in your work environment, if you ever feel like they're taking a waterfall approach, this is a great thing to reference, to have the reference point for the actual damage you can suffer from using the wrong project management methodology. Cool. So what's causing all this? So there's a bunch of different causes. I tried to focus just on the big ones, and this talk is not actually going to give you the solutions for how to fix all of these things. I wanted to really focus on the fact that by default, all of our projects are all set up for failure unless we take action to make sure to set them up for success. And I just want to drive that point home. But you can kind of cheat and maybe figure out from these causes some of the things you might do to make projects successful. So as I mentioned earlier, as a consultant, I'm sort of in this unique position where I'm going into organizations that typically aren't functioning at maximum throughput. Some of the customers I mentioned actually are doing really well, and they just want more of the same, and they reach out to us. And sometimes internally, they've had struggles, and they've seen that their internal team maybe hasn't modernized how they work. Maybe they're lacking some competencies around more modern practices that they want to implement. And so they've reached out to us. And so we get a very interesting outside perspective into looking into these organizations and seeing the same thing over and over again in a lot of different cases. And so some of the items from this are pulled directly from what I've seen a lot in corporate America, and even in some smaller projects too. I hear this all the time, the sooner we get started coding, the sooner we're going to be done. This is a really interesting phenomenon in Agile project management as well. People are really good at managing engineering using Agile, but not quite so good at managing products using Agile. So managing everything from strategy to design to implementation. So there's a big emphasis on write a user story and get to work. Also, teams may not have all the expertise. So again, maybe focusing just on engineering. We get calls all the time where people say, hey, we need a dozen engineers, and we kind of talk them off the ledge. It's like, hey, maybe we should, what user research have you done? How have you aligned your business needs with this product? What evidence do you have that we're building the right thing for your customers or your users? I hear this all the time as well. Planning or activities to define what we're building and make sure it's in alignment with user needs is going to take too much time, and we're going to miss our timelines. This is something I hear all the time. It's super interesting to me because to me, things like prototyping, wireframing, user testing, user research, they're actually time-saving activities. You do them because the mistakes that you make, if you don't do them, cost you a lot more than doing those activities in the first place. So for me, those are actually accelerators that get things done faster. But at face value, they seem like they just take more time. And what I see a lot of times from other internal companies providing project plans, or let's say if we're going on a competitive bid with someone, that they come on and they just say, hey, we're doing agile, like here's our plan, we're gonna do iteration 1 on month 1, and like iteration 2 on month 2. And they come up with sort of these very nebulous approaches to what they're gonna get done. Probably instead it should look, so we see this all the time. And I think it's a lot more continuous, right? But it's probably better to start out with some of these, or what I'm defining as planning activities, and probably have this be a continuous cycle that's a little bit more well-defined to align what you're doing. Cool. So this is actually tied into the first cause, and this we see all the time, right? It's how do we cut corners to reduce costs and save money? And oftentimes, at face value, the way people are cutting corners is by cheating best practices. Yeah, there we go. I'll just give you all of them at once. So we see this all the time. It's very similar to what I said earlier. Hey, we don't want to set up continuous integration. We don't want to do user testing. I think it's really super important that as a product manager, you understand all of the best practices on the technology side and on the product strategy side, because most certainly you don't have to use every one in every scenario. Best practices are best practices because they drive more business value when you use them than when you don't. So if there's a scenario where it's unnecessary to use one in order to drive business progress as efficiently as possible in a given time frame, then absolutely it makes sense not to use it. But you have to really understand kind of the why behind everything you do and how it applies in the context that you're applying it in order to make that decision. And I see it happening very arbitrarily quite often. Another really interesting thing that I think the product management folks will appreciate is I view product management itself as a role that's a catalyst for a team. So if you have, let's say a small team of designers and engineers, 5 or 6 people or so, if you add a product manager that's really good, generally they're going to make that entire process for everyone else more efficient. So you're actually going to get a higher output from that entire team that's greater than the sum of the parts. So for me, having the right people on the team as well is a time-saving, cost-saving, and higher velocity solution than cutting corners in the wrong places. Now, the other really difficult thing with software projects is a lot of times, things that you do in the beginning of the project or don't do, decisions that you make that are wrong, or that may not have been good decisions, don't show themselves until much later. So in month 1, you may have decided to circumvent, maybe you have a built-in customer base and you're launching a new product inside that customer base, and you didn't get feedback from the folks that you're selling it to, or you didn't do any like pre-sales activities. You kind of just built it in your own vision. Well, you're not going to know the result of that until 6 months later when the product's ready and you actually try and sell it and try and get it in front of people. So by circumventing a best practice in the beginning phase of a project that could have helped you establish whether or not a feature was a good fit or a new product was a good fit for your customer base, you will spend the entire duration of the time that it takes to build that feature, that functionality, and go through that entire process if you have a QA process internally to get it into production before you've actually realized that that may not have been the best decision to make. And so this delayed impact, it happens in almost everything in software development because the build cycles end up being quite large. So it's not uncommon for it to take a month, 2 months, 3 months to see the consequence of a mistake and have a really hard time kind of tying it back to the root cause. Cool, so error-prone people management. So this is all about, and I'm sure everyone here has had to deal with this, inflating scope, feature creep, et cetera. There's lots of names for it. Personally, I really don't have a big problem with feature creep. I think it's really good. Like a lot of great ideas have been born from a lot of great solutions have been created from just free-form ideation. Although I do think it's good to take those ideas and put them through a process of evaluation in order to figure out what to do. So I'm not really, I actually like collaborating with people and coming up with ideas, but then I like taking those, usually like they're rooted in some intuition or some like business case that you kind of feel might make sense, but you haven't gone through the process of vetting it out yet. So I just think they should all go through a vetting stage. But the problem is people are just so good at having ideas, and it's so fun, and it feels like such a big contribution when you have a great idea. And people are horrible at sticking to plans. We're like really, really bad. Like evolution didn't create a system of an animal that was like really good at planning. So we end up with the situation quite often where we're really bad at managing big lists of ideas and like all of the politics and personalities that come along with that. And another problem that comes along with this as well is not having a clear structure in place where people get to every project, in my opinion, has compromise. So if you don't have a clear structure in place where people get to understand when we made a plan, we committed to an idea, how did we vet it, why did we agree to it? Maybe it wasn't my favorite choice, but I understand the process of selecting it and I believe in that process. And if I'm working on a team, we all need to believe in that process. So not having a defined place where we mutually understand that we can change our plan, that we can vet ideas, how we can respond to change when we learn new things, can cause a system where it's a lot of like he said, she said, well, my boss wanted this thing, my boss like really wants this thing, can we just do it, please? Like, let's just put it in the product and they'll get off my back and maybe I'll get a raise and we'll still do all the good stuff that we need to do for our customers. So I see this a lot, very few projects I see having this built in. And this is kind of ties back to the vetting idea. And this is also a huge one. So does anyone here make like a business case for every major feature that goes into their product? Really? Yeah, you do, every single one. Yeah. Does anyone make a simple business case, kind of like ROI-driven business case for some of the features that go into the product? Like, hey, I think we could make, yeah, you better raise your hand. Yeah, cool. So it's crazy. I mean, we're here, we're trying to deliver value to people. If we deliver that value, like hopefully they're gonna buy our product or they're gonna take some action that indicates that we've created value for them. Maybe we have like a freemium model or something. But it's so uncommon for people to sit and kind of reason out. We're going to invest a month of time for 4 people to build this functionality, and that's going to cost us like tens of thousands of dollars. Well, I hope we make more than tens of thousands of dollars coming out the other end, or else eventually like, we're not going to have a company anymore. And we get like, really, the bigger an organization gets, like the more kind of detached from this visceral connection to the success of the product you become. I think at startups, you can see the writing on the wall if you make a misstep. Well, it's also really easy to correct it. But you might have some KPIs that you're watching really, really super closely. So you tend to be able to autocorrect a little bit more easily. But yeah, this is a huge one, and I think is really a great way for people to also just mutually get on the same page about why we're doing something. Cool. So that's it. I just wanted to share these things with you. The big takeaways are, do everything you can to plan big projects like small ones. We saw how horrible the big projects went. And like I said, I'm not giving you all the solutions. This could mean a ton of things to a ton of different people. I have my own idea of how to do it, but as a general strategy, reduce the complexity, try and focus on operating how small projects operate in order to be effective. Save time and money by making smart investments as opposed to cutting your investments. So invest in the right things, try and understand why the best practices are effective in different situations, and invest in them when they make sense for you, but don't arbitrarily dismiss them or arbitrarily accept them. If you don't understand one, it's so easy to go on Google and read a couple of, or if you haven't done it before, if it's new, it's so easy to run a small contained experiment or do some research yourself, read a book to learn just a ton of information about something that may be new to you so you can reason about it more clearly. And 3 is a sentence I love that really just describes to me what I believe is the best strategy for Agile, which is having a cadence-based planning model with economic prioritization. It kind of encompasses the idea of everyone understands when we are making compromises, AKA when we're doing strategy sessions, when we're changing our strategy, and how that happens, and that there's a mutual understanding of that, and it's happening at a certain cadence. And on top of that, we're thinking about things from an economic prioritization model. So everyone that comes to the table with ideas has an equal format for which to talk about them and discuss them and get them on the roadmap. Cool. So I'm David Coleman. Yeah, it's great to meet all of you. Thank you so much for having me. And that's my talk on why your project's going to fail, but hopefully it really won't. And if I made you sad, Jesse's still here. She'll make you happy and talk to you about all the wonderful things in California and, and having families and changing the world. But great to meet you all. Thank you.